What really I was probably enjoying was breaking security, not building security products. Putting it bluntly, most security products are absolutely horrible when it comes to user experience. Be patient. I think a lot of first-time entrepreneurs, when they get in, they want success very fast. And generally, that never happens. Almost always, it takes a lot longer for things to work out than what you originally predict.
Today, I have with me my founder, Vivek Ramachandran. Quick introduction about myself. I'm Mridula Kapur. I'm the Chief of Staff at SquareX. I've had the privilege to work with Vivek for over 3 years now. And so I'm very excited to get this started with. So first of all, thanks, Vivek, for agreeing to join us for our podcast. We all know you've had a very illustrious and a glorious career in cybersecurity that spans over two decades. We know you've written and authored multiple 5-star rated books on Wi-Fi security, to discovering, first in the world attacks like Cafe Latte attack, to then going and, embarking on an entrepreneurial journey, especially at a time where in India people weren't so confident in doing so with Pentester Academy. So tell us all, what made you, what was the start? What prompted you and attracted you to the field of cybersecurity to begin with?
Thanks so much for having me on the show. And it's always interesting and surreal to get interviewed by somebody I already spent so much of time with during the day. I think you've covered most things, honestly. You already told everything that I've done. I don't know what else remains. But starting off, if we kind of go back 20 years, that was honestly a time where cybersecurity was very, very early, very nascent, and you really didn't have much happening. For me, the key turning point was that, when I was in the Indian Institute of Technologies, at that point in time, we were very interested, very curious about the internet and, how hackers were doing various things. And roughly the year 2000, there was this very big attack which happened on Yahoo, which was done by this German hacker called Mixter. And he had come up with this tool called, TFN, or Tribal Flood Network. And back in those days, I was preparing for IIT, or I was just about to get into IIT. And I absolutely had no clue about programming or any of those things. So I ended up downloading the tool and then opening it up, looking at the source code and absolutely understanding nothing. So to me, that was kind of awakening of a curiosity. And really, I was very curious, how this one single hacker was able to write a tool which was actually bringing down, the world's infrastructures, right? Like people like Yahoo were all being brought down, Alta Vista, some of these companies, unfortunately, many of them don't even exist today. So that got me thinking, that got me curious, and that is how I really started teaching myself programming, C programming, assembly, and all of that. And once I went into IIT, I guess, that was a very good place for me to go ahead, foster that interest a lot more. Some pivotal, milestones were where I ended up getting an internship in Zurich, where they wanted me to work on wireless security. That project went off to be really a very big success. Eventually, the professor there gifted me a laptop, which I'd actually used. And back in those days in India, nobody had laptops. I had seen my very first laptop when I was in Switzerland, doing that project. So post that, I started off in the industry, very reluctantly picking up a development role at companies like Cisco Systems and a bunch of others. And very soon figuring out that, what really I was probably enjoying was breaking security, not building security products. So that is really how I finally ended up saying, let's go to security research. I was lucky enough that there was this company called Airtight Networks in Pune, and they were building wireless intrusion detection systems. And they wanted somebody on their R&D team who could end up doing, research, trying to see if I could break different technologies and protocols and all of that. So went in, I was a workaholic even back then, probably maybe even today, did 14, 16 hours, weekends, finally found the Cafe Latte attack, which was the very first way in the whole world to break into wireless devices by figuring out, what the Wi-Fi keys were and a bunch of other ramifications because of that. So once I did that, I said, this is my life's calling. And back in those days, there wasn't any security research or hacking research companies or any of that. So the only real way was that I had to quit my job, go back to my parents' home, and really in a very small mezzanine floor, I wouldn't even call it an apartment, probably a room with an attached bathroom, just work on what I believed was great work. So spent a lot of time researching. And then I told myself, hey, I myself would end up forgetting many of these things. So why not shoot these short videos and just keep it so that I could revisit it later? And then I said, well, why not just put it online? And that is really where, I started with securityfreak.net, which became securitytube.net. Within just a couple of months, we started getting, hundreds of thousands of people from around the world visiting it, coming to me saying, hey, why don't you fly down, teach us cybersecurity? So that ended up, with me kind of traveling 25 countries in just the first 2 years, teaching the who's who, right? Like defense agencies, counterintelligence teams, red teams, in organizations which almost everybody would have heard. I don't want to make some things public because, of course, some things were under NDA. Post that, saved up a bunch of money, started the very first office, then slowly grew the company. We built security monitoring products, which we again sold to defense agencies. We ended up, creating eventually what became Pentester Academy, which was labs in the cloud. And eventually that company got acquired as well. Along the way, absolutely enjoyed, building out a great team, doing, amazing security research, speaking at conferences like DEF CON and Black Hat pretty much every year. And yeah, I think I was one of the lucky ones who was very passionate about something very early on and got an opportunity to build not just a career, but multiple companies out of it. So I'll pause there. And now we are SquareX, and let's see what else you want to ask there.
I think what's really interesting here is how you didn't let the unknown stop you from, furthering going down a path. Like, for example, the time you ventured into Wi-Fi security or you discovered cafe latte attacks. These were fields that were just coming up. And like you said, at the time that your professor gifted you a laptop, there wasn't that many laptops in the market. To then going ahead and building a wonderful, one-of-a-kind lab platform with Pentester Academy and training thousands of professionals globally. We know you eventually sold that to INE. How did that feel? Because being so closely associated with something that you have created over years and years of hard work, was it bittersweet to let it go? Did you, have a repent at the end of the day that maybe you should have, held on to your baby? Tell us a little bit about that journey.
So, I started my entrepreneurial journey, of course, as a trainer, right? 2011, traveling around the world and all of that. And to me, that was a great mission. And I absolutely enjoyed speaking with people, teaching them, seeing so many of my students finally get jobs, come back to me saying, hey, Vivek, we learned so much from you. And now we have this great job. Even last month when I was in San Francisco at B-Side San Francisco, a couple of folks came in working at companies like Google, and they were like, well, we started, our career learning from what you had put out. So I think, training education is a very satisfying profession, right? Because you can see the value of, what you've done, the impact of what you've done. And I really enjoyed it, like over almost a decade. I think, over a very long period of time, what I also ended up seeing is I had some very interesting ideas on products, which I felt nobody was really building. So I guess for me, the turning point was when, I started thinking about the impact that I could have by building security products which would end up protecting, the whole world versus probably the impact I would have teaching thousands of students. So I guess, as you progress through your career, many a times you want to ask yourself, hey, what's the next big thing you want to do, right? What is the bigger impact that you can have depending on where you are at? So I think that is when I made that decision. And I said, you know what? I think Pentester Academy has been a great run, a very satisfying experience. But now probably it's time to kind of hand the baton over to someone else who's just as interested, just as I would almost say, dedicated, motivated as we were to go ahead and build it further. So I think when, INE reached out via Providence Equity, spoke to the CEO of the company, spoke to multiple team members. So I think that is really where, we felt that they were very motivated. And after meeting multiple people on the team, we kind of realized that, we shared the common vision, the common bond. And that is when I made the sale. Do I regret it? I think not. And the reason I say is like, at any given point, like a startup, a company, a product, just like a baby, a child, needs to be nurtured. Someone needs to give full attention to it. So I think the moment you start feeling that, you probably are losing that love and you want to do other things, that is probably a good time to hand it over to someone who probably is still as motivated. So I think, it was a good conclusion. The best part is INE continues to use the lab platform that we've built and has grown and compounded that multifold, which is even more satisfying. And yeah, I wish them well, and I hope to see them have a great exit, maybe publicly list someday. And yeah, for the platform to carry on.
I think that makes it a very beautiful journey, and obviously knowing that INE is still using the platform and that's become crucial to their success now must be definitely satisfying. Before we jump on to SquareX, I do know that, in fact, a lot of us know that you ventured into something a little bit more creative, where you went into authoring and publishing comic books. So tell us a little bit more about that, and how did that come into being? What prompted you from, being Vivek Ramachandran from Cybersecurity, the hacker, the educationist, to now going and writing a comic book and publishing that?
Right. So I think I've always loved to challenge myself, right? Whether it was discovering first in the world attacks, whether it was building a company, creating products and whatnot. Now, one of the things, of course, I always used to wonder, as a deep technical guy, is if you have, any kind of ability to do creative things. And of course, it is a very different part of the brain that you have to end up triggering. And that is really where I was always very interested in trying something out when it came to like, arts or, comic books or whatnot. I think for me, the pivotal event also was that, I was talking to my elder son and he asked me, he was like, "Dad, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, why don't you go online, just Google?" Because, he's of that age where ideally he should be doing that. So then he came back the very next day saying, "You know what, you're a hacker, you steal from people." And that to me was, very surprising, very shocking. Because of course, the last thing you want is for your kids to think, that you are a thief, right? And I quickly realized that the reason why, he ended up concluding that is the mainstream narrative around hacking cybersecurity is very negative. And unfortunately, this is because, you have so many malicious actors who are breaking into organizations, genuinely causing financial damage, reputational damage to all of these folks. So I felt, unfortunately, the mainstream narrative had completely hijacked the fun, the curiosity, the enjoyment that you could actually get in pushing systems to their absolute limit and even breaking them down. So then I said, look, what is the best way to probably teach kids, his age, younger or a bit older, on how to look at hacking and cybersecurity? And when I looked back, I was like, okay, there is that certain age where all of us have, gone through reading comic books, loved superheroes and all of that. And then I said, look, there isn't a hacker vigilante comic book available. And even mainstream movies like Matrix and Swordfish have a very unrealistic, kind of characterization of how hackers are, right? Like where Neo just waves his hand and, the wires part ways and everything happen. So then I said, okay, you know what? This is a possible way for me to try out different things. One is, of course, to, have my hand in writing something out to see if I could storyboard an actual, hacker vigilante series. And, alongside with that, also seeing if we could do something creative. So, of course, I absolutely cannot draw to save my life. So, we definitely had to go out there and hire a couple of folks who are very good at that. So over a weekend, I sat down, wrote the whole storyboard, showed it to a bunch of folks, and many of them said, "Hey, you know what, like you seem to have a knack for writing, describing things, probably because, I've been a trainer, I've taught people in class. And that is really how we decided to do, Hackers, Superheroes of the Digital Age. That was the name of the comic series. We brought together a great team of artists, colorists, and all of them. And then we ended up creating, I think, almost 5 or 6 comic books. We released the first. We plan to release, a couple of the remaining ones as well. Of course, we haven't found too much time, but yeah. So that's the story. That's the backdrop. Hopefully, I get to continue to do that, for a long time.
That's amazing. And for those of you who don't know, it's VR and comics, right? So they can still go on to VR and get a digital copy of the comic. Let's switch over now to SquareX. So, from building the lab platform to going and presenting at various cybersecurity conferences. And like you said, and we've all been hearing, you always say attack is the best form of defense. And that is what the lab platform also eventually was built towards. What prompted you to build SquareX, and why the field of browser security at this point of time?
Yeah. So, my background over the past 20 years has always been an offensive attacker, right? I've discovered vulnerabilities, spoken at conferences, and that is really where, I'm biased, but I can kind of end up saying that I feel defending is more tough than attacking. And the simple reason is, for a hacker to succeed or for an attacker to succeed, he can have 100 tries and he only has to win once. While for a defender to be considered a success story, he will have to win always, which is he has to protect against all the 100 attacks. So, just purely game theory, over a large period of time, the attacker is kind of slated to win, right? That's what probability predicts. So I used to always kind of think, these are ways attackers are breaking in. Well, if I would actually build a defense product, what would be the way that I would do it? Now, alongside with that, I was asking myself, hey, what is the best field to pick up, right? Cybersecurity is very crowded. There's a product for everything. So I was like, okay, are there any real unsolved problems? So really what I kind of found was, over the last 7 to 10 years, I think with the cloud and SaaS and all of that becoming the way software is delivered, users end up spending over 90% of their time on the web browser and maybe around 10% of their time in applications like Outlook. And this was a very key realization, right? Because which basically means in an enterprise, the most used application is actually the web browser. People don't realize it. But if you think about it, who owns the browser? Companies like, Google, Chrome, Microsoft Edge, Apple Safari. These are the guys who kind of control the browser. And of course, they are primarily giving it out for end users and consumers to, browse the web, do online transactions, watch videos, whatnot. The browser wasn't really meant as a platform to deliver security controls. And this was a key realization. Now, the big question was, could you even build something into the browser, right? Because it's an application. It isn't really a platform per se. Now, the tailwinds that we were seeing is, as the web started becoming the focal point via which, people were consuming information, people were working on different applications, the browser companies were spending a lot of time trying to make the browser a very capable system, almost to an extent where now it's a capable platform. So the platformization of browsers actually is allowing people to build a bunch of applications within the browser. Now, how do we go about doing this as a browser extension and leveraging technologies like WebAssembly and whatnot, where we can deliver more complex applications which can run as part of the web browser? So that was an aha moment for me where I kind of realized, look, everyone's using a browser, which means if I solve a browser security problem, that is going to impact not just end consumers, but also enterprise users. The fact that maybe over the next 10 to 15 years, work is still going to happen via the internet, that actually means I'm working on a problem which is almost generational and timeless. Mm-hmm. So which meant it made sense because, the phase where I am in my career, I would definitely want to dedicate building the next company, which could have an impact over 10, 15, 20 years and beyond. So this was the backdrop. And then the big question is, okay, can you even build something? So that is really where, we managed to get an early team. We did a bunch of research. We tried out a couple of experiments. And that gave me enough confidence and conviction that we could build a full-blown security product residing entirely in the browser. And that is really how SquareX came to be. And, we got together the whole team, you and many other fine folks who had worked with us previously at Pentester Academy. And of course, many new faces who we've kind of added along the way.
I think that's amazing. But the burning question, and I think a lot of times you may also be asked is there the security space, and especially when we look at enterprise security, right? There are so many players out there. You name like CrowdStrike, Centennial One, from big endpoint security players to big players in secure web gateways. Do you really feel like there is a need right now for a product which is just an extension that sits in the browser that these companies are today not solving? And if that is the reason, then what really sets SquareX apart from the solutions that are already present in the market?
Yeah. So if you look at safe browsing in the enterprise, and what I mean by that is, your enterprise users are online. Now you want to make sure that when they get attacked, you're able to block, mitigate those attacks, and maybe also be able to threat hunt, which is a fancy word for saying across the organization, you're able to quickly look at whether similar attacks are happening and how you could probably stop them early, right? Now, in this market, if you were to primarily break it up, you have endpoint security products. Now, unfortunately, endpoint security products, just by their name, protect the endpoint. Unfortunately, they inspect file and processes which are running on your endpoint systems like laptops. They absolutely have zero visibility into the browser, which basically means, let's say that a bad actor has targeted multiple people, in your sales organization, contacted them over LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever, basically saying, look, I would love to buy something from your company. Here is my purchase order, or, here is how you could build out an invoice. Now, when your sales team, multiple people end up clicking on links or downloading that file, and maybe that has ransomware in it, the only thing that endpoint security can do today is basically tell you at the very best that Tom, Dick, and Harry in your organization ended up downloading a malicious file, and this happened via Chrome. There is nothing else they can tell you as to how that file was eventually, kind of found online and what happened next. Now, the tricky part is at this point, an IT admin or a security team will have to go to the user, Tom, Dick, and Harry, and then ask them, hey, how did this happen? Where do you get this file? Now, either employees don't remember or don't want to remember because they're afraid that maybe they've done something wrong. So unfortunately, endpoint securities can do absolutely no attack attribution when it comes to attacks against employees when they're online. Now, the other product category which you mentioned, secure web gateways, that is actually part of a larger offering, which is SASE and SSE, right? The world's biggest cybersecurity companies are actually in this space. Now, this technology came to be almost 7 to 8 years back. The web wasn't very complicated. Web applications weren't very complicated. Now I feel, this component has come of age, where today, SWGs, because all they are is SSL intercepting proxies, unfortunately are trying to infer application layer attacks using network traffic. And we can already realize, how vain that attempt is. Because if you think about it, SWGs are looking at HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and trying to infer where, if this is a clickjacking attack, this is a session hijacking attempt. The only way they could do this if they were able to fully emulate what was happening on the user's browser and how all of this HTML, CSS, JavaScript is interacting with the user, have more application context, have an understanding of, tabs and windows. Unfortunately, because of their architecture, this is impossible to have. Now, what this means is most of UI-based attacks are anyway undetectable. Now, so the big question is, hey, what about traditional attacks like a ransomware download, or a malicious website, with a well-known bad HTML, CSS, JavaScript? So this is really where we did a bunch of research and something we plan this year to put out at, security conferences. We've discovered a whole new class of attacks. And I'm going to kind of like keep that mystery, till later in the year, where we've realized that attackers, bad actors can very easily bypass SWGs and even have very well-known ransomware like WannaCry, or whatnot, which SWGs would have detected if they had seen the whole file. Unfortunately, with these attacks, the attackers can make those completely invisible. And this is something we've, looked at, and we've even talked to customers of many of these, SASE, SSE players. And unfortunately, this opens up a very big and gaping hole. So I think, really what we realized is that unless you have a browser native security component, monitoring whatever the user is doing, looking at DOM events, looking at browser events, taking all of that, correlating that together, and then figuring out if there are attacks happening, using policies, heuristics, machine learning models, and all of that, it's only then that you can secure the user session online, while they're visiting anything on the World Wide Web, which is actually the Wild Wild West as well, right? Finally, I think there's this little space called enterprise browsers, and they look at a very nuanced, very smaller part, which is, your internal websites, SaaS websites that you have. They provide access control to those sites so that your employees would forcibly only have to use their browsers to get to those sites. So I think, based upon this entire space, the fact that all attacks are mostly, web origin, we kind of felt like there was a need for a new browser security solution which could detect, block, mitigate, and threat hunt all of these attacks which are happening on your enterprise users. And that is really why we feel like, SquareX has a reason to be alive and kicking.
That's amazing. And I think one of the things that we discovered, since I've been part of the SquareX journey from the beginning, was a lot of security products end up failing because at the end of the day, the end users find they're either restrictive or too complicated to use. And I think the company launched a consumer version, which was very well received. We have over 200,000 users globally. And we recently also launched the enterprise version at RSA. What has been the initial reaction from the community? What kind of advisors do you currently have on board? Of course, Sequoia, being a seed investor, really helped the initial bit with research. But what is next for SquareX, and where do we go from here?
Yeah. So I think the big reason I wanted to put out a consumer extension, with a reduced set of features, is I think, putting it bluntly, most security products are absolutely horrible when it comes to user experience. Having been in this space for 20 years, I've never found any employee get excited because a new security product is now getting installed on his computer. So we realized that, user experience, unfortunately, always takes a backseat, which means whenever there is a security event, most of the times you're getting, in front of productivity. And that is not acceptable to most organizations, because ideally, most security should be invisible rather than, getting in the way of productivity. So I think our North Star right from the start was, could we build an end user security product in the browser, but something which does not interfere, but rather enhances productivity. So very simple example, even if we did believe that a file was malicious, could we still allow the user to open it up, but with no possibility of any harm happening to him? Because for what it's worth, maybe this was an email document from a recruiter, a legit recruiter, who was targeted himself, but this contains a job offer that, that user has to respond to maybe in the next few hours. So I think the reason the early free kind of consumer edition took off so well is people started seeing that we were addressing a very important problem, which is don't get in the way of productivity, don't get in the way of work. So I feel that was a very good key learning for us. I think as a team, we delivered very well on it. And from there on, we started developing the enterprise product as well, because we felt having 200,000 installs, the fact that people were loving the product, people were writing into us basically saying, hey, you know what, I would like to deploy this to the rest of my enterprise. It gave us that, confidence and conviction that, okay, this is something now we could push as an enterprise offering. So, of course, an enterprise game is very, very different. And that is really where it is very important that one has to, build out an entire network of advisors, angel investors who can give us connections to the broader community, to, CISOs, people they know and whatnot. So I think the last few months, I've spent a good amount of time trying to talk to people, tell them about our mission, tell them about our vision, and then to see if, they also feel, enough motivated towards what we are doing, if what we, want to do resonates with them. And we've been able to get a lot of great folks on board. The founder of DEF CON and Black Hat, Jeff Moss, the CEO of Black Hat, Steve Wiley, Abbas Kudrati, who's the chief security advisor of Microsoft, and a couple of very, very good angels, founders of companies which have exited, founders who, I've worked with before, like Nikhil Mittal, who's doing altered security, and many others. I think a couple of those names we will kind of reveal along the way as we officially sign them and, they're on board. So that has been an exciting journey, primarily because I feel like, for most companies, if you aren't talking to people who are willing to challenge the way you want to go to market, challenge the way that you're building products, if you don't do that, you kind of just live in your own echo chamber. And I think the last few months, as I've started talking to more and more people, more and more prospective customers, it has shaped the way that we are building our product, towards something that we feel more and more confident that our customers would end up using. So what is next for SquareX? I think, we are just a year old. When it comes to startups, I would say that, I've been very, very happy with the progress that we've made. The fact that within a year's time, we won the Cyber Entrepreneurship Summit award, which happened at the NASDAQ Center, during RSA. We've gone ahead and received hundreds, if probably, over 1,000 testimonials from our users. We've built an enterprise product, which is now being piloted by very large, very well-known organizations. Of course, we will reveal at the right time. So I think, we've delivered very well. Now, what do we still have to do? I think as we now accelerate on the GTM path, we need to be able to quickly uncover more interesting use cases that SquareX could end up solving. We need to make sure that, customers believe we are a customer-first company. We have great customer support. We are able to go ahead and, understand their problems and present very quick solutions. So I guess now is a time when there are going to be very fast product iterations. There has to be a very aggressive go-to-market, both in America as well as rest of the other hotspots where typically people like to adopt, innovative products very early on in the cycle, and then eventually find, the right partners, the right investors, who will believe or who rather would, resonate the same ideas, the same way that we look at this market, the way we look at solving the problem. So I think, the next few months are going to be just as, or, if not more exciting than how the past year has been.
So tell me something, how does one become part of SquareX? Is SquareX currently hiring for different roles? What are the different ways that the community who has been following you and is interested in the kind of work we're doing at SquareX can actually be part of SquareX?
Yeah. So I think we're always hiring, smart, motivated people. Broadly, of course, tech and GTM. So I think, if you love building great technology products, if you want to be constantly challenged, especially if you're very curious about like how we end up building stuff within the browser, that, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or write directly to us. And similarly on the GTM side, if you're somebody who loves that startup 0 to 10 phase, where you're going into the market, you're learning new things, where you don't get easily dissuaded by disappointments, right? Because there's so much of constant learning and iteration which keeps on happening. I think, hey, GTM team is always looking to hire. Now, for folks, of course, who are very happy, in their jobs, or who probably still love what they do, wouldn't want to formally join SquareX, I think you could be great testers for us. You could be a sounding board where you could give us a lot of great feedback. And of course, if you love what you're seeing, you could recommend us to your organization, to other people who you meet within your network, and those could all be great ways for you to be involved.
That's amazing. That gets me to one question, right? So after having successfully sold Pentester Academy, and then getting onto VR and comics, now building SquareX, what does success look for you for SquareX? Where do you see, where do you see or envision SquareX, where you feel like, okay, this is what I wanted to achieve while working on this mission?
I think, I've always seen that financial success in India endeavor is actually a byproduct. I think if you do great work, that thing always happens, right? So I generally don't make, financial success as the primary motive. Having been in cybersecurity 20 years, seen this space evolve so much over the years, I think what I really wanted to do was make an impact where we build a security product which can fundamentally change the way the space is getting looked at, and can also fundamentally, have a massive impact on organizations when it comes to protecting against attacks and all of that. So I think if we do it right, if the market sustains, the team continues to execute well, then hopefully at the end of it, we're going to have a great company which has made a massive impact, to our customers, and has gone ahead and, saved them from so many big threats and attacks which would have completely tarnished not just their reputation, but caused great financial damage. So I'm hoping this one is more about impact. This one is more about, us as a team being able to etch kind of our name, in the history books of cybersecurity, as how we fundamentally, ended up changing this market.
Having been successfully run multiple companies, and of course, I really hope that SquareX is able to get to where we want to get to. What would be your piece of advice to young individuals or entrepreneurs that are just starting out? Looking at your experience, are there any anecdotes where you felt maybe some things didn't work, but you still got motivated? Because this journey towards building something is not as smooth as we sometimes show it to be. So what would be that one piece of advice that you think individuals like yourselves or young professionals can actually hold on to?
So, I always say that, the entrepreneurial journey for every entrepreneur is very different because, it's an entirely different market, how things come out to be very different circumstances. But there are a few common things I've kind of seen, for successful entrepreneurs, which eventually kind of like works out. The first one, of course, is be patient. I think a lot of first-time entrepreneurs, when they get in, they want success very fast. And generally, that never happens. Almost always, it takes a lot longer for things to work out than what you originally predict. And I love that saying is, I have this is a saying which I love a lot, which is, you will always overestimate what you can do in a year, but underestimate what you can achieve in a decade. And I think if you're not patient, you will never give it enough time. You will never have, the enthusiasm to do multiple iterations, to keep quickly learning from the market, to keep quickly learning from your customers, and eventually deliver the best product, to them, to the market. So I feel that is number one. Number two is, I think in today's day and age, everybody seems to prioritize, raising money over building. So raise enough, build, and then go back. Don't make raising money as the most important milestone. Last but not the least is enjoy. Enjoy the experience. I've seen so many founders where, of course, the startup journey is strenuous. No denying that. But you could make it enjoyable for you and your team. It's important to have breakout sessions, go for team lunches, create an environment where there's a lot of, fun, humor. Because without that, I think it's very difficult to sustain motivation over 3, 5, 7, 10 years, which is roughly the average it kind of takes to build, mid to large size companies?
No, I think this is a very good piece of advice. And to your point of enjoyment, I can validate that at SquareX, we all work very hard. But at the same time, we do have our breaks where we go out for team lunches and we, celebrate those small victories. And also, I think one thing that you missed out on also sharing is that probably create an environment for your team to, not be afraid to make mistakes. And this I can speak with personal experience, having worked with you. I think those are fantastic, pieces of advice that people can use in their professional journey. Any last thoughts to, your prospective customers or users that have been using SquareX, or even your team for that matter?
I think, we've had a very long discussion. So I think I'd just end by saying, if you're watching this and you're worried about your users getting attacked online and you want to be fearless online, then go check out squarex.com, try out our enterprise product. And we'd love to go ahead and help you out and build with you. That's all. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you.